Hi, Chris.
Why, hello. It's nice to see you as always.
We meet again now in Portal Talks, and today we're going to talk about something we've actually spoken about and written about on both sides of your blog and our blog, about what comes first, platform or portal. Um, and a point I discussed with Abby from GetDX a second ago, which touches on that. He was referring to a research report you guys are going to publish this Friday, which is about what got people into developer productivity, and one of the top answers was CI/CD. And I remembered that when we started interviewing people about why they chose platforms, the first stories they told us were about CI/CD. So the organization embracing this idea that something is very, very broken. And I think this goes very well into our session. If the organization feels that something is broken and doesn't have something as basic as CI/CD, then are they mature enough to have a portal? And what is the level of their platform maturity? And this is why this session is called What Comes First, Platform or Portal? I'll make a quick introduction. Chris is the head of the DX Consulting Group. Did I get that right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And also one of the sponsors of this event. So thank you, Chris, for joining. And let
Yeah.
me share the questions I'm going to ask Chris. But Chris, feel free to say any introductory, anything you'd like to say.
Yeah, it's nice to get to meet everybody. Like you said, I get the pleasure to work with Abby and others here at DX, and I am working on setting up a consulting group to help really drive the impact of developer experience inside of people's organization, leveraging the platform that we have and really being able to to help kind of drive strategy and kind of further thinking into developer experience. So it's really, really great to get to meet everybody. I've spent a lot of time on developer portals. I worked closely with Backstage and worked really closely with Port and others. And so I have a pretty broad understanding of the challenges that people are going to face and kind of the pros and cons of both platforms and kind of portals and everything else. So really get a chance. Nice to talk to you, Ronnie, as always. And look forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, and maybe Chris has an answer to the question, the chicken and egg question that we're going to ask him. So what comes first? Portal is platform, Chris and myself. I'll start with things that are happening in the Gartner world. Platform engineering is one of the 5 top technology trends in engineering. They also published a platform engineering hype cycle last week with a ton of technologies and categories and companies. And they're saying that within platform engineering, portals are the most frequently piloted technology, which brings us again to the chicken and egg question. If you're just starting on your platform engineering journey, are you going to do a portal? Or maybe a lot of people have established platforms. This is another answer. I want to tell a story I heard from one of our users, which I really, really love. Again, playing on that story of starting with CI/CD, they're a group of about 600 engineers talking about having no platform or portal about 3 years ago, starting on all kinds of patterns of platformizing themselves or whatever you can call that. Looking at portals and saying, we don't really get why you need them. And then finishing with 11 different tools, trying to train developers on them, and then going back and saying, we need a portal. Do you see that happening to people, Chris?
I see it all the time, honestly. And, I think it might make sense just to clarify the 2 terms. And because if you look at the industry and you look kind of across there's a lot of kind of cross-pollination of terms, which can be a little bit interesting. And, so when I think of internal developer platforms, it's really it's being able to take all of the tools that an engineering team might need and figuring out a way of being able to provide those out to the community. So maybe you're going to do that through a CLI, but it's all about abstracting away complexity and then being able to provide that information back to the engineering teams. And when I think of a portal is more information about individual services, a kind of user interface to really help enable that experience for different personas and for different jobs to be done. And one of the challenges that we have here is that they all interplay with one another, and where do you draw the line can be a little blurry, because if you take a tool like Humanitech or some kind of orchestration platform, they would call themselves an internal developer platform. But you look at, tool like Port, and you could make a case that it's an internal developer platform. And so, the thing that I always go back to is, what are their personas? What's the job that they're trying to do? And then, how do you leverage any of those types of platforms to be able to help accelerate accelerate that job to be done in the easiest, quickest, and fastest way possible?
I like that you touched on the orchestrator question. I think the industry may stumble into this big religious discussion on where is orchestration happening. Is it within those internal developer platform tools? Is business orchestration happening also within portals? We believe that can happen with automations. But to me, the really interesting thing is that, at least in my definition, there can be a tool that's central and is a platform, but in reality, a platform is the set of tools that you run those reusable self-service actions for developers on. And the portal, although it may have some orchestration automation in it, is an interface.
That's right. That's right. When I think of a portal isn't exactly doing much. It's orchestrating all of the tools that are below it. And the platform is the team that actually owns the tools, owns the services, and manages the, like take a tool like SonarQube, right? Like, yes, you need to be able to run those kinds of scans, but it can be complicated. You need to understand, the API and the interface that goes to it. And so if I am a platform team and having one of my jobs is abstracting away that complexity, allowing for easy use of that tool. And, that might be accessible through a bunch of different ways. That CLI inside of your pipelines, but you may then leverage your portal to then access information from that. And so again, they all tie together, but you need to figure out where is the entry point for a given thing. And, so when I think about, these differences, and it's, that having that separation, I think, is a good thing, but understanding that interface and where you draw the line is critical when you're thinking about both of these tools, like both of these kind of techniques, because they are quite different, but they play together very nicely.
The most difficult question I'm going to ask you today, when you write IDP or think about the word IDP in the middle of the night, do you mean internal developer portal or internal developer platform? I don't even know how to answer this for myself.
Yeah, I try not to get lost in terminology for almost any of these things. There's like this whole kind of space is just bogged down and in this terminology and acronyms and everything else. And, I came from kind of the portal space. It was where I started. So if I think of an IDP, I think of a developer portal, but honestly, it doesn't really matter. The key is understanding the needs of your organization and not getting caught up in the next shiny object. And that's one of the big problems that I see people have when thinking about either one of these is, oh, well, Gartner said 80% of people are going to stand up at the developer portal this year. I should go stand up a developer portal. Well, standing up a tool is not the end goal. The end goal is improving developer experience driving better productivity, and, through that, having kind of better developer satisfaction that then equals better, engineering productivity at the end. Like, being kind of wrapped into these shiny objects is just a really bad way of thinking about it.
I actually have a question about this regarding the shiny object question. You've seen a lot of large organizations in your consulting roles in leading developer experience practices. When do you think portals became a thing?
So portals became a thing when they're an answer to the complexity in which we see inside of engineering organizations now. You go back not that far, and most things were monoliths. You had on-prem deployments, and things were relatively simple, or at least you could find where they are. With the kind of proliferation of microservices and cloud environments, things have gotten incredibly complex. So, and even in the cloud environment, you can use things like Kubernetes, you can do serverless, you can do VMs, there's a million ways to orchestrate an application in the cloud. And that level of complexity makes things really hard to decipher. So if I am an engineer inside of an organization and I want to build something new or figure out how do I work across this ecosystem, that's not a really easy question to answer in a lot of places. And even with people that have really good documentation, that's still a hard question. And so to me, the rise of developer portals was to be able to help alleviate the complexity of that ecosystem. And whether it's understanding the services that are out there, the tools that are out there, kind of documentation that's out there. And I kind of look at it as being a really good traffic cop in a lot of ways. And being able to say, okay, well, if you have a problem, you can start here, and this will help you, at least point you in the right direction to help alleviate some of that confusion. And, people waste an incredible amount of time looking for information every day. And I've seen the stats somewhere along the lines of, an engineer wastes about 8 hours a week looking for information, and they waste about 9 hours of expert time looking for, of their experts, they waste their time. And about 45% of those questions are redundant. So those are things they should have been able to go find.
Let me ask you a question there. Is it a documentation issue or is it a broader issue?
It's a broader issue, I think. Like, everybody can point back to, like, we should document more, we should document more, we should document more. But to me, it's really, you need to rethink your kind of systems and platforms. And you need to rethink your experience in working through these particular problems, then be able to build a user experience on top of that and leverage things like platforms and portals to be able to do it. But it's that rethinking of that process and then aligning, removing that waste and friction inside of it, and then you leveraging the tools to be able to facilitate that problem. And so instead of, I worked with a company the other day. They had over 100, excuse me, they had over 100,000 pages inside of Confluence. That is an insane number. And if you think about, a developer trying to go find information in 100,000 pages, you're going to find everything from being new to being really old. And so how do you start to rethink some of that, simplify, and, leverage these tools? And I think that, to me, is really the root of developer experience. And a developer portal and developer platform is a really good enablement tool to be able to actually drive that improvement.
And also with those 100,000 pages, there's a trust issue as well, which I think portals try to alleviate, which is to provide engineers not only with data at their fingertips, but data that is not stale and that can be trusted.
That's right.
Trust, not to frustrate the developer.
Well, and if you think about think about the trustworthiness part there. So even if a developer were to find the information that they think is correct, they've probably found other information that counteracts that. So what are they going to do? They're going to pick up the phone and call somebody. They're going to send somebody a Slack message. They're going to set up a meeting. They're going to do all of those other things. And now you've taken a problem for one person and you've populated that problem to other people. And even if that only takes 5 or 10 minutes for that other person to respond back to you, you've now broken their flow state. You've now, you've changed the way that they're thinking. You've added to their cognitive load. Maybe they only had an hour to get something done before their next meeting. And now you've kind of broken that flow. They've got 15 more minutes and they're like, well, I mean, I can't really get back into this. I got another meeting. Now, all of a sudden you've burnt 30 minutes of their time. Take and extrapolate that out over 100, 500, 1,000 developers, and you have a massive amount of waste that is hard to quantify in some ways. But, I know Abby talked a lot about that, but, when you think of implement platforms and how do you fix some of that, it really is your portals and platforms.
Yeah. So chicken and egg. I tried to diagram this and I said I will not use chicken and egg images from the web. So I created this on my own. And I want to go back a little to the initial discussion. You said that modernization is really breaking the developer experience. And that's one of the reasons people go platform or go portal.
Yeah.
But let's say I've just been appointed head of platform engineering at an average size organization. I have a lot of legacy, so I don't have a full platform. But I'm moving some of it. I'm doing some Kubernetes and I'm doing some other things, and I've set up the CI/CD. And I'm trying to do all these things and modernize my tool set, but I haven't done it across my entire stack. And actually, I think this is the case for almost all customers I've ever spoken to. Do they need to finish that modernization to get a portal? Do you think that there's a point where the platform is so small, if we look at the CNCF's platform maturity model, platform engineering maturity model, that you should not do a portal? Or is the portal really the organizing idea around which you tie everything from your platform into it? Or is there no answer to this question?
I think there is an answer to these questions. It's that I would say that there's no one answer to these questions. And, the thing that I always go back to is, what are the goals and initiatives that that company cares about? What are they trying to accomplish? And are they trying to go through a modernization effort? Sounds like the one you were referring to might be. Are they a Series B that's getting ready to try to scale? Are they, a 200-year-old bank that's trying to, not be a 200-year-old bank? Like, there's a whole bunch of different ways of thinking about it. And, the reason I go there is, what is the biggest challenge that your engineering teams are suffering with? And, I see a lot of people, back to the shiny object, go, ooh, I want a dev portal. But they'll stand up a dev portal and they can't get anybody to use it. And it's because it's not really solving a problem. And, maybe the problem they were wanting is better self-service, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's the fact that I can't understand the ecosystem, and I need to understand contract testing better so I can stop breaking stuff in production or breaking my builds. Getting the power of kind of surveys and interviews and building feedback loops is the most critical aspect here, because you have to understand what the real problem is. And, you can waste a ton of money building platforms and portals or any of it that doesn't really solve the problem. But that said, what I see a lot of is, it's almost always is self-service the biggest problem. And, So when I think of, big friction points, I see a lot of, especially older organizations that are still incredibly ticket based. And so if I want a new database or I want a new whatever, I've got to put in a ticket. I have to go bow down to the cloud gods or to the on-prem gods to give me, hopefully, accept my ticket and give me something. And that could take days sometimes. Sometimes it could take weeks. And that has a ripple effect across an organization. And solving some of those problems can be better done through a platform. And, thinking about kind of governance as code, building self-service models that can have that level of governance and be able to, provide people things in kind of a timely fashion. Like if that's the problem, then the portal's the way to start with. And, then, maybe then you go to, okay, well, the portal has a CLI. And a lot of people want to leverage the CLI, or maybe people don't want to leverage the CLI. Maybe they want a UI. That's when you can start to think about adding in a portal. And, okay, well, if that's where I want to start, that's the big problem. Great. Build some of those platform capabilities. Then if people need a UI or they need feedback from that, then you can start to do that inside of a portal and be able to build that feedback mechanism and those other pieces. So starting with, this is absolutely a chicken and egg problem. But if you kind of just take that step back and say, well, what's that problem we're trying to solve? Then how do I draw that through line across both of them to get to that value? And then start to build on top of that and build and build and build. It kind of goes back to the old kind of Chinese adage of like, when's the best time to plant a tree? 25 years ago, the second best time's today. And, the same thing really applies when it comes to kind of optimizing developer experience with platforms and portals is, it's a slow process that you have to really work your way through if you truly want to change the way that your organization works and truly drive better productivity. If you get, kind of lost in the shiny objects again of a platform or a portal, you're almost doomed to fail from the beginning, because you're, very rarely, if I go to a developer and say, hey, would you like another tool inside of your workflow to get your job done? They're almost always going to say no, unless there's some major issues inside of there. They're going to probably say, I would rather you optimize process and get some of this other kind of garbage out of my way, not needing some other platform. And so thinking about it from that problem statement, how do you optimize everything across the board and kind of build that, kind of thin sliced value across them really is my, is how I would go about starting these things.
I want to ask a question about the 200-year-old bank without offending the 200-year-old bank or the presumably 200-year-old software developers, on-prem software developers in the 200-year-old bank. So if any of them are on this event, please don't be offended. And I'm referring to something we spoke about before. Do you think the questions around portal and platform and answers are different depending on the experience of the development team? You had also mentioned in one of our previous conversations an example of like an e-commerce giant modernizing. So is the modernization very different for different type of developers? And if yes, then what is the answer there in terms of how you think about the portal?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, there was it goes back to kind of the goals I was talking about. So, that kind of e-commerce giant that I was talking about was really going through a monolith to microservice transformation. And so if that's the goal of the organization is, okay, we no longer can leverage this monolith. It's causing lots of issues. We need to modernize. We're going to move to microservices. Well, there is what I would call the lift and shift model, which I think is really bad. I always cringe when I hear that of like, let's take all the problems that are there and move them over to here. But if you actually think about how do we improve things along the way, it's how do I build a better developer experience for the developers that are kind of making that shift from the monolith to microservices? How do I provide them with the tooling and the kind of architectural guidance to make sure that what we end up with isn't just an absolute cluster that's even worse than what we had before? And, like, it's been very, there's a lot of hate that has been thrown at monoliths for a long time. Like, they can work just fine, and there's a lot of problems with microservices, but if you don't think about how do you manage the developer experience, how do you manage the dependencies, how do you start to structure things in a way that starts to make sense, you can end up really just taking what was at least one thing and just shattering it on the ground, and being able to then try to clean up the pieces. So, thinking about those goals and how do I actually improve things along the way is that really critical piece. And as that, kind of company that's trying to make that shift, think, so when we were there, one of the things we did is we stood up a developer portal and we created a bunch of starter kits. So if you wanted a new microservice, you could have that new microservice spun up in less than 10 minutes. And you're going to get a really good formatted Java project. You're going to get CI/CD pipelines, and you're going to get your cloud environment set up. And it's going to deploy it to it. So the only thing you have to do is start to write your business logic. And so if you think about the time savings that's going to bring, that these, the developers don't have to start from a blank screen. They're going to have all of this stuff, and they can really just think about how do I add my business value? And all of that was brought together by a thin slice of portals and a thin slice of platforms. And that was the problem to be solved. And now once you get some of that done, now you can start to add in other things. And, after, we started with that particular piece, then as people started to create microservices, that's when we built out the catalog. That's when we started to add other, connections into other tools and be able to start to, understand what that service catalog looked like and being able to build it while that transformation's going on. Like, that's one model that works really well. But, to the question about the 200-year-old bank, like, they're not going through that kind of a transformation. They're just trying to get incrementally better. And, that's where the answers are a lot less clear about what the problems actually are. And that's where you really need to, understand the complexities from the development perspective, set up things like a center of excellence, do surveys, be able to build that in, put some product thinking around it to really help figure out what the right thing is. Because I did work with a gigantic old bank, and the first thing they did was stand up a developer portal that nobody used, because that wasn't really the problem. And that to me is, regardless of either side, that to me really is the big thing.
And in the e-commerce example, assuming, again, without offending anyone, assuming that the developers there were not that current in kind of modern platform practices,
Yeah.
what did the abstraction for them look like in their self-services action? Was it like really simplified so there would be no need for training, so you just fill a form with very fixed inputs, or was there another approach to that?
Yeah, that it was a little bit of a good chunk of the developers that I worked with were old school Java developers that really didn't understand good modern CI/CD practices. And what we ended up doing was kind of a twofold solution, which is here's a really good starter kit, and here's really good pipelines. And we also did kind of product dojos of like, let's teach you about good CI/CD practices. Let's inform you of what this looks like, and also abstract away that complexity. And we leverage like Circle CI for the pipelines. And one of the things I love about Circle CI, has its challenges too, is the org model. So we can say, like, you own your pipeline, but we expect you to run these things inside of your pipeline. Don't care where they are, but you have to run all of these things. And, we were able to abstract away a lot of that complexity while still allowing them to own the pipeline, be able to run governance on it, and then train them on how to use it, and built a mechanism for, kind of kind of a community to help them. Oh, hey, I have this problem, I have that problem, we thought about this, and be able to then kind of leverage that community training to help build things up. And it was honestly really successful.
So you're not using the abstractions in the portal to completely not do training, but you're making it easier to train and avoiding traumatic outcomes post-training.
We were able to just go faster, right? Because if you were to say like, okay, well, we need to train all of these folks on good CI/CD practices, like, that's not an incredibly easy thing to do. But if that's the thing that is slowing down the transformation, that becomes a problem. And so how do we make sure that they have ownership and control of their pipelines, and they're in charge of it? But, we bring out the really good platform practices of abstracting away, having to understand 20 different DevSecOps tools and all of their APIs. Like that to me really is the prize there.
Great. So I wanted to ask, maybe we kind of answered this. So cases when portals are first, are they the 200-year-old bank or the e-commerce provider where you have to overcome a serious developer training and developer knowledge, developer modernization really challenge? Or are there other cases where you think portals should happen? Not first, there's always a platform, but when you have to first go for a portal.
Yeah, the kind of shifting towards like a platform engineering model can be really hard for companies that have never done it. They don't have kind of central services. It's really up to the individual kind of siloed groups in an organization to figure out how to build and manage their own like kind of infrastructure and everything, and tooling and everything like that. And I look at, all of the stuff is a journey. And so like you might start at one place, but you need to just, how do I consistently get better over time? And inside of that model, it might be better to create a portal. If discoverability of your organization becomes a challenge, like a portal and a service catalog might be best. Because if there's not any kind of idea of a set of central services, there's really not a platform to build. And so a portal might be better, so you can understand what the other silos are doing. You can build at least some level of self-service and be able to, leverage some level of automation to help, inside of whatever silo you might live, and be able to, expose documentation and those types of things. And that can be a really great place to start. And then as you start to improve your, kind of developer experience thinking, and, starting to think about, maybe not, duplicating effort and all the other things that can come from that, then you can start thinking about some of the platform pieces and being able to, drive down costs, improve quality, lower levels of fragmentation across your ecosystem. And like that can be the maturity of moving from one to the other.
And then platforms are first is probably the more common use case then.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, in kind of the more modern companies or smaller companies, it's easier to build a platform first. You're going to get more value from it, kind of like I talked about before, where, self-service is generally the problem. Levels of quality is a problem. And, like the whole CI/CD has been around a long time now, but there's still a lot of people that don't do it very well, with really flaky pipelines and all of these other things, and low levels of quality. There's no real kind of governance inside of them. And being able to take and kind of take those steps, it can be really beneficial to the teams on the ground. And if you can say to a team like, hey, instead of you having to try to figure out how to leverage these 10 tools on your own, let's abstract that away. You don't have to worry about the tools themselves anymore. You don't have to worry about keeping them up to date. You don't have to worry about security. You don't have to worry about all the things about the tool itself. The only thing you need to worry about is calling the CLI inside of your pipeline or calling this orb inside of your pipeline. And so that's going to free up their time, and you're going to, like, you can start to build that kind of cost savings mechanism. And, you know, that can be incredibly valuable for a lot of companies that may not have the crazy levels of complexity that I've talked about before that drive some of the catalog building inside of those portals. And this might be the kind of the first spot to start.
So if I kind of try to repeat this, we, you know, up until now, we were mostly focused on using platforms and portals for self-service. And now you've touched more on using platforms and portals to drive standards compliance.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
so there's-
you know, that's me is one of the really big benefits of kind of a, you know, platform engineering, abstracting away the complexity while increasing quality and increasing levels of governance. Because you can, you know, you can have kind of centralized control of federated ownership. And, you know, one of the big challenges that comes up in a lot of organizations is, you know, they've kind of gone a little too far with the you build it, you run it kind of concept, which I still agree with. You build it, you run it, great. But let's provide you with a really great set of tools to enable you to build it and run it, and ensure that we're driving like architectural standards, quality standards, and kind of security standards. And I was working with another company. There was one team that they had that had over 2,000 security vulnerabilities in their application. Yet they wouldn't fix them because the team was so critical and so busy that they didn't have time to fix any of their security stuff. And it's like, well, that's a problem. And, you know, you know, once you've made it to that particular point, it's really hard to get back. But, you know, if you're thinking the way that I you know, was kind of referring to, you can stop that from happening in the first place. Because if you have some level of control over pipelines and what is acceptable or not acceptable from an architecture and security perspective, you're never going to get to that point. And you can start to have some level of control without doing like centralized pipelines, which is what I see people do a lot of. It's like, oh, well, nope, we're going to just own all of these pipelines and you just leverage our pipelines, and now they're super rigid and, you know, there's no flexibility in it whatsoever. And trying to find that middle ground can be really beneficial to both, you know, the teams themselves and to, you know, the broader engineering organization.
And in your sense, do people start on the platform/portal journey as a result of like shiny new thing, standards and quality issues, or self-service issues? Or is that too simplistic a question?
Yeah. I mean, I think it comes from a bunch of different things, but like cost is almost always one of them. A security incident could be one of them.
One security incident that rattles the entire organization?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, oh my gosh, like, what do you mean we're not checking, you know, our pipelines before they're checking for security incidents or vulnerabilities before we push into production? Like, you know, that stuff will start to, I mean, cost is always a big one. You know, most organizations are either moving to the cloud or in the cloud or thinking about moving to the cloud. And, you know, the cloud can get real expensive real quick with all of these different ways of you know, of kind of deploying an application. And so when you think about like some cost saving methods and those kinds of things, like building, you know, platforms is a really great way of driving cost savings while kind of improving everything else.
So really the most common use case is growing both the portal and the platform together. It's a question that is a statement. I've sinned here. Do you agree?
I do agree. You know, it goes back to kind of that thin slice approach of understanding the problems of your engineering organization, and then using both of these as an enabler to solve that problem. And, you know, you have your portal, you have your platform, and then you have your your CLI and your IDE. And, you know, understanding the problem and then figuring out how do you meet the developer where they are. And, you know, even something as, you know, simple as like switching tabs can be a big pain for a developer. And so, okay, well, maybe, building some kind of IDE integration is going to be the best way to do it. Well, maybe you also need some of that data inside of your portal, but then it's powered by the platform. Like it really all needs to work together. Bring a product mindset, just talk to your development community. Like they know where the problems are. You just need to talk to them and they will tell you. Then figure out how do you start to systematically approach solving it? Because in the end of the day, like, your developers need to understand that it's light at the end of the tunnel and not a train coming to run them over. And if they're bought into that, and you've built that mechanism of kind of continuous improvement, and you have these, the portal and the platform, these other systems to help enable that, that's where true, like, productivity gains can really be had, and just better overall developer sentiment. Like it's something along the lines of like 83%, I think is the number that I saw the other day, of developers suffer from being burnt out. Yet it's like right over 70% code on the weekends. So it's not the act of coding that is hard for developers. It's the organizational problems and the platform problems and the system problems that they deal with. And so thinking about those challenges and then using these enablers to help solve them is really the path forward.
I want to ask you about a couple of, so I'll skip the anti-patterns. I wanted to ask you about what you think an MVP should include for a portal. Does it depend, or is there like a good set of practices for a portal? Are you thinking about self-service, software catalog? It really depends on the organization. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. I always talk about a data foundation being the most critical. And so, pulling that data together is the kind of the light that you can shine onto things. And so, when I think of a good portal, like it could be self-service and probably would be, but also pulling in, data from a bunch of different integrations. And I know Port has a bunch of integrations that you can pull data in with. So pull that data together, pull data, try to, get some kind of like your services catalog, like, maybe people aren't leveraging it, but start to look at it. And do you have a taxonomy? Do you understand how your organization actually kind of tends to work? Like Conway's Law is a real thing. So start to at least understand what that current map looks like. And do you do domains? Do you have different organizations? How does all of that tie together? And maybe people aren't going to leverage the catalog at first, but that's going to provide you with a lot of information on the possible dysfunction of your organization. If you cannot come up with a way to organize different services, there's something to figure out. And that is a leadership problem. That is a kind of an engineering level problem that the developers suffer from. But this is a great way of understanding, can you actually define it? Pull in some of those, some of that self-service stuff, great. But use it to, build that current state map of how things look. And then, do your surveys and talk to your dev team, and then figure out those steps and just keep driving it forward.
Super interesting. In our early days, we used to talk a lot about creating data models for the software catalog. And kind of what I'm hearing from you is in some cases, there's no taxonomy. So no internal taxonomy for the organization. It's a big problem. And then, the bad thing is that you have no taxonomy. The best thing that can perhaps happen to you is that the service catalog will force you to create a taxonomy and then advertise that taxonomy to the entire organization.
Yeah, you may have never even thought about it. And I just don't think people have, there's a lot of organizations that have never really considered it. It's like, oh, well, we just operate this way. This is the way we've always operated.
I understand this mess.
Yeah. And so just take that step back and go, okay, well, doing just like a basic developer journey is always super interesting too. Like, what do you need to do? Like, if I was to create a new application inside of this organization, what would it actually look like? Who would I talk to? What would I do? And, starting to, pull that data together will help you figure out what questions to ask like that. And, the taxonomy is going to kind of match your organizational structure. And is that working? Is it not working? What friction is that bringing to the development process? And, people talk a lot of, like, you get down into like the engineering planning level, they talk about interdependencies and dependency planning and all of this other stuff. Well, that can be really hard if you haven't thought about it from an organization perspective. And like, I know we're getting a little far away from portals, but a portal to me is a window into your organization. And if your organization is a mess, it's going to show you that. And it's going to be that mechanism to help have those conversations. And that to me, from a kind of product thinking or from like a leader thinking, that to me is one of the most valuable parts at the very beginning. And it might get real uncomfortable for some people to start to talk about that because, I see a lot of people that want faster typers. We just need faster typers to do better productivity. That's what we need. But really what you need is to rethink your systems and the way that your organization operates. And a portal is a really good enabler for that.
So not only do you see the real taxonomy when you start with a service catalog, you're immediately forced to abstract it for the sake of your developers' well-being or good practices.
Yeah. If you're truly wanting to go on that journey and not just implement some shiny new tool, that's the process in which you're going to start to go down. Ask a lot of those questions. Make it be uncomfortable a little bit and start to rethink how things go. And that will lead you, to a good portal and to a good platform. And slowly you can start to change your organization in a better way.
Great. We're kind of running out of time, so I'll kind of skip to, I wanted to talk to you about thin slicing, continuous improvement, and adoption. But we kind of have to end this. So this was what comes first, portal platform. These are our emails if you want to ask questions, learn more about Chris and the DX Consulting Group. And any parting thoughts, Chris?
No, I mean, to me, anybody thinking about portals and platforms, just bring that product thinking, just be willing to rethink entire systems and platforms if you truly want to make gains from a developer productivity or developer experience perspective. If you think some tool is one tool or whatever is going to help save the day, it's not. And it's going to take a little bit of time and thinking and effort, but you can look back in a year or two from now and go, wow, we've really changed the way that we operate. And we've really been able to drive just a more efficient operation. We have happier developers. We have happier people. We're better at planning. We're better at all of these things. And, there's no better time to start than right now.
Great.
If anybody's interested in continuing the conversation or anything, please feel free to reach out to me on my email. You can reach me on LinkedIn. More than happy to have a conversation about portals or platforms or pretty much any of it.
And thin slicing and adding patterns and everything else, taxonomies.
Yeah. I look forward to talking to you again, Ronnie. I appreciate it.
Okay. Bye, Chris. Thanks.